metaverse forgotten. So the next would be microservices cost too much. Who'd have thunk that? Microservices, containers, cloud native development were basically a development religion for a long period of time. And that kind of remains today. But early on, I realized that if you're going to build systems using microservices, that they're going to use many of the services in very inefficient ways. And so in other words, using underlying resource such as cloud computing. So you could build a microservices-based system, depending how you architect it, it's going to cost about 10, sometimes 20 times the amount to operate them based on the consumption of resources because of what microservices are. And so it's the architecture in terms of building systems around very small, fine-grained services, which allows you some flexibility in how you leverage these technologies. And obviously it's bound to containers and, bound to cloud native development, all those sorts of things. And didn't see the cost advantage in doing that. In fact, there's a deficit there. So in other words, you're going to move to microservices because you believe that they're going to have some sort of an architectural advantage. You're going to be able to leverage into business value. You're going to have to pay for it. And so many of the organizations who built their systems using microservices ended up moving them back to a monolithic architecture because the cost was way too high and they didn't necessarily need it as a business requirement. So my guidance today is much the same. Unless you have a requirement for the microservices architecture, don't use it because it's going to cost more. So the next one, and a big one, because if you went back in time 10 years, and I would tell you that I think there's going to be a bunch of repatriation projects in 2025, they would look at you like you're crazy, but that ended up being the case. So repatriation, in my prediction, would rise quickly, and made this several years ago for the same reasons we just talked about. The cost of public cloud providers were way too high or way above their expected price points or cost point that many of the enterprises expected to pay. And so in many cases, they found better, more optimized platforms with some on-prem hardware, private clouds, moving to managed service providers, other public cloud providers like sovereign clouds, things like that. And they went ahead and made the case to move those applications from a private cloud provider like AWS, Microsoft, and Google back into systems that are, smaller niche, public cloud provider players, or your own hardware, which is typically going to be way more cheaper, if that's a word, than leveraging the same hardware platforms that are in a virtual space on the cloud platform. So contrary to popular narratives, cloud or bust, everybody was going to, consolidate on a single cloud provider. This was something I saw coming a while ago.